Hello, everybody. How are we doing? Welcome back to our Sunday podcast, The Debrief. We are going to be talking through a few different topics tonight. We're also going to be catching up on some of the headlines that we didn't get to cover over the course of the Labour Party conference special and the conversation we had on Friday around more of the kind of US side of things. So we've got a few things that we're going to jump into. I'm going to be joined tonight by our wonderful team members. We have Curtis and Lewis joining. Hello.
Hello.
Both.
Hello. Happy Sunday.
Happy Sunday. How's everyone feeling?
Oh,
overwhelmed.
Overwhelmed. Typical news week. So much going on. I don't know where to look.
The usual. It always feels like once we get to Sunday, on Saturday night, I feel like there's no news. I'm like, oh, there's nothing new to cover. We've looked at so much stuff this week. And then Sunday afternoon, I feel like about 50 things come out.
We complete the news on Saturday.
Yeah.
And then the world resets. And then we're ready for Sunday.
That's how we...
Yeah. I wish the world could be a little less selfish and wait until Monday so we can enjoy our lives.
It's really us who suffer.
Oh yeah, it's us. We are the victims here. Absolutely.
We're the real victims.
Wow.
I just don't know what to look from America to the UK to the Middle East. It's just so many notifications.
Yeah, it's not, I don't know if it's getting more stressful, but it's definitely starting to wear a little bit at the minute. We have a couple of stories that we want to talk through tonight. We also in the title of this live, you'll see we want to talk a little bit about like the liberals abandoning the left as a wider theme. It's something that we've seen a lot on the UK side with a lot of Keir's announcements over the course of the Labour Party conference and continuously being kind of beaten down as the left to not criticise Keir yet. I got told by someone earlier today I have to wait for the October budget before I can say anything negative about him, because obviously he's done nothing so far that would indicate anything that's worthy of criticism. And then on the US side, we've got a lot of left-wing activists and people on the political side who feel uncomfortable about voting for Kamala Harris. And as a result, they're getting basically beaten into submission in the exact same way. So we'll talk through that a little bit. But Lewis and Curtis, you both got a couple of stories you want to talk about tonight. Lewis, what do you want to go through?
Oh, for me, it's got to be Benjamin Netanyahu's speech at the UN and just everything that's going on around that. It was an interesting speech, so to say.
I've watched a couple of clips of it, but I keep having to like look away. Like I can't hear him in the same issue I've got with Keir. But we'll watch the clip in a little bit as well. Curtis, from your side, what do you want to talk about?
I want to talk about Kemi Badenoch. She is one of the contenders to be Tory leader. And famously, she said quite recently, she said, I'm very particular about the things I say. I don't say something I don't mean, or later on I'll go, I can't believe I said that. Yet she keeps on saying incredibly stupid stuff. Now, the two latest things she said, which is really sort of, which is really striking, is one, she thinks that maternity pay has gone too far. Great vote winner for women there. And she also wants a really insane immigration policy. And within this immigration policy, she talked about asking people's view on Israel, and essentially that being a qualifier on whether you should be in this country or not. Now, of course, she's a Zionist, so that means if you say you don't support Israel or say anything bad about Israel, that could go against your application, which is insane. That is an attack on free speech. That is making people, we'll get into that in a bit, actually. But yeah, they're the two main things from Kemi Badenoch, and she's insane. She's an absolutely insane candidate.
So a light start from your side.
The light one.
Start with a bit of small talk.
There is no light story here. I think I have the lighter one, technically.
Minute one. I think, we've got a couple of comments in the chat. Nobody wants to talk about Kemi Badenoch. Curtis, you are mad.
Let's talk about your hair, though. Let's start with your hair, at least. Okay, your hair looks fantastic. Everyone in chat, doesn't Sneaker's hair look amazing? I know Lewis is brushing his hair as well. But I'm sorry, but I think the winner goes to Sneaker.
It's feasible that Becca was talking about either one of you. Because both look gorgeous. Both looking glorious.
Yeah, Becca didn't actually specify, so
Could have been any of the three of us. I feel like we look like the 3 stages of Simba. When
oh yeah, I love
Uh,
that. Simba from the Lion King. Okay, yes. So, little bit of a nice opening, but let's jump into, sadly, BB. Do you want to get us started, Lewis?
The fun one. So yeah, he did a speech at the UN on Friday, and it was fun. It was entertaining, of course, as it always is. Very light-hearted. But the issue is that he will always use this opportunity to, further his own political gain, to look like the strong man, to try and look strong in front of his country, while also taking digs at everybody else. He called the UN anti-Semitic again. He also said, the best quote, I think, from the entire day was that this was the most moral campaign in history. Just let that sit there for a second. The most moral campaign in history. But the thing that I want to kind of point out, what was that, sorry?
In history.
In history. Bold claim, right? The one thing I kind of want to point out on, though, we could sit here and just, dissect the entire speech and go through it and show loads of clips. But there's kind of one thing that I want to focus on, which is this clip. It's only 10 seconds. I'm just going to quickly put it on now.
Fueled by Iran, Palestinian terrorists in Judea and Samaria perpetrated scores of attacks there and throughout Israel.
Oh, did that play? Oh, I submitted the shorter one. My bad. Anyway, the words I wanted to focus on mostly there was Judea and Samaria. So this is a term used by the right wing in Israeli rhetoric. So these lands no longer exist. They're no longer called Judea and Samaria. But when were they called that? They were called that about 2,000 years ago under the Kingdom of Israel. So it encompasses lands like the West Bank, parts of the Golan Heights, which obviously Israel currently occupy too. And the reason that they use this is because they believe it's their land. So while, Benjamin Netanyahu is stood up there saying this is the most moral campaign, we do eventually want peace, we want safety, we want security, but at the same time, using the names of the land that it used to be called because they believe it's still theirs. This would be like, Vladimir Putin calling Ukraine part of Russia or the Soviet Union. It's just inflammatory in every single way. And they continue to use these words. Even the left in Israel don't use these words because they know it's inflammatory. It's essentially saying, this land is ours. We're going to get it one day, and we're trying to get it right now. And it's only inflaming tensions using words just like that. And he continues to use religious quotes as well throughout the entire speech, which they continue to do on the Israeli right. And the Israeli right is just encompassed right now by the most bizarre extremists that you could ever imagine. I constantly say this to people all the time that, if you were to take like a comment like what Nigel Farage said a few months ago on Sky News when he was talking about we have a problem with Muslims in this country, we would say that's pretty far right. We would say that's pretty, not mainstream. It's quite bad. That's as bad as it gets in the UK, right? But when you look at Israeli rhetoric, it is beyond anything in most Western countries. And this is what people don't understand. And sometimes it's subtle, and sometimes it's not. But just to quickly also show you something very quickly on the screen, which is not appearing. Are we having tech issues?
Is it the graphic?
It's the graphic. I'm clicking it, but it's not coming up. There we go. So just for context, this is a map that was submitted by the World Zionist Organization in 1919. This is the land that they wanted because religiously, many Zionists, especially revisionist Zionists, which Benjamin Netanyahu is, they want this land. So if you look at the top of the graphic, it actually encompasses South Lebanon, which they're currently bombing right now, which they previously occupied. It includes the Golan Heights. It includes parts of Egypt and the Sinai Desert. It includes parts of Jordan, because this is what they ultimately wanted. Can we take the graphic down? It's not working on my side. Thank you. Thank you to my lovely assistant. This is what they wanted. This is what they've always wanted. And this has been their plan since the beginning. The revisionist Zionists is what Benjamin Netanyahu's political party was founded on. It's a belief that Israel should expand, that it should actually reclaim.
It's a religious extremist party.
It is
because
absolutely.
a lot of their foreign policy is based on their. I mean, you mentioned actually Lebanon, because I was going to bring it up. They're now talking about Lebanon being a God-given right.
Yeah.
So I think all of this is in the narrative they're weaving, that no, we're just fighting against terrorists, and of course 90% of people know that's all bullshit. But Lewis, you're adding the extra context here, and it's not just they're really aggressive people and heavy-handed. No, there's a reason behind the attacks on Lebanon, and that's the colonialist mindset, which is that they want Lebanon too.
Yeah.
There's also, I think there's also the
Sorry,
it kind of
Charlotte.
it's okay. It kind of ties into, I think it was in January that he was saying, remember the Amalek, remember what the Amalek did to you. And that was really heavily criticized at the time because it's referring to a biblical verse that has been used multiple times to justify the killing of Palestinians. That kind of language of like the Judea-Samaria, talk about all these kind of historic, like the same when he said that this was a fight of light against darkness, and invoking all of this biblical good and bad rhetoric. It's very, very scary in the context of trying to tie Judaism overall to the actions of the state, but also it kind of plays into this. It's almost playing back a lot of the liberal rhetoric back to people of like, but it's okay when we do it because we're the good guys. We're the historically good guys. Like the Bible says that it's the good thing to do. Like it feels like this whole lights versus darkness, referring to all of this ancient. In any other context, it would be completely ridiculous to be using that to justify what's being done. But it feels very scary now.
It's more than ridiculous. It's fascist. It's
Yeah.
overtly fascist.
Yeah.
Now,
Absolutely.
I think a lot of people feel uncomfortable comparing the Israel project to Nazi Germany, right? And I know, I mean, I was very careful at the beginning to not correlate that, because I understand it's a very emotive language to use, and it's understandably controversial, right? To say that, okay, well, the Israeli state, which is for Jewish people, to then conflate a regime that wanted to exterminate Jews seems very off the cuff, or not off the cuff, seems very seems almost like the wrong thing to say. And I know that people have been called out for it, but at the end of the day, you've got to look at the facts, and more it's becoming, I think, quite clear, right, that Israel and especially Lukid and Netanyahu sound like Nazi Germany. I mean, the language they use. I mean, Netanyahu has quite literally used "final solution" for Palestinians. That's word for word verbatim for what Hitler used to say. So I think people need to understand this is more than ridiculous. This is just fascist rhetoric. Children of the light, children of the dark. It's about this deep racism embedded into Israeli society that goes all the way to the top of the government. But also, it's not just racism, because if it was simply that, I don't think it would be, as much as racism is harmful, I don't think it would be on this such a big scale. But it's colonialism within that too, which is why they're going after so many different countries like Lebanon, because it's colonialism intertwines with racism.
It's also important to remember that an awful lot of people who are there's a huge Christian Zionist demographic as well. Christian Zionists, as we know, their whole reason for being Zionist is that they want Jewish people living in Israel, because when the rapture comes, they'll all be there and go straight to hell. There's a lot of political Zionists who it's a very clear weaponization of language and of ideology. And then when it's also combined with playing into Western white supremacy, and the fact that the people who are being targeted are Black and brown people.
I think I'm glad you brought that up, because I think Zionism, by and large, is a white supremacy project. And also, the mention of Christian Zionists. A lot of people in the early Zionist movement, when it came to the Balfour Declaration, they didn't like Jewish people. They weren't doing it because they wanted Jewish sovereignty. They were doing it because they wanted Jews out of Britain. And one of the ways was to use the state apparatus to pretty much ship an entire race to another country. Now, that worked hand in hand with the British state because they wanted imperialism. So there was this agreement between Zionists and the British state, which was none of it was in respect for Jewish people. It was actually a disrespect for Jewish people, plus making sure that there was a country in the Middle East that had it was a strategic area for trade, given that the lands they've occupied is next to the sea, and that's good for trade. So none of this is about respect for Jewish people. So when obviously you have Zionists who talk about this is about defending Jewish people, and anyone who opposes Zionism or what Israel's doing is anti-Semitic, I think it's the other way round. I think that Zionism is very anti-Semitic.
There's one word though, actually, I want to jump
Sure.
on that you said a few minutes ago, which is fascism, because what's interesting is that revisionist Zionism, which is what the Likud party and Benjamin Netanyahu believe in and was founded on, a few little facts here. So the founder was called Ze'ev Jabinsky. I'm really sorry if I'm butchering that pronunciation. Does anybody like to take a guess who worked for him while he was creating his ideology? One little guess. Benjamin Netanyahu's father. This all ties back into fascism. And guess where this fascism was developed? It was developed in fascist Italy. So Ze'ev Jabinsky actually helped form a Jewish naval school in Civitavecchia in Italy. And when Britons kind of slowed down on their support of the Jewish state during the Mandate, Jabinsky actually started looking towards Benito Mussolini for inspiration on his ideals around Italy. And he wrote about this so much that he found Mussolini to be an inspiration, that he revitalized a once great nation through national pride, but also through his his fascism. So everything that the Likud party stands for and Benjamin Netanyahu stands for is founded in literal fascism. Funnily enough, he wrote about the fact that he actually believed in equal rights for the Arabs who were living there, but only through force. So maybe actually the long-term plan is to just do all this by force, but at the end game guys, everyone's just going to magically get equal rights and everything's going to be fine, but only if you give up through force and everything else that's been doing right now.
That's why they say that phrase, violence begets peace. Right, that's why it goes that way. It's not violent begets violence. It's you're violent and then it's fixed.
It's the
and then
the
there's
ends
no more violence.
The means of justifying the ends, because don't worry, Netanyahu is actually a peaceful man. He's an egalitarian. We just got to wait for him to do. We need to allow him the space for it.
Yeah. Just let him. Right. Yeah. It's really scary. I think it's also just it's getting more. I think I was talking about this on Friday with a social society on the Normal Island show. It's going a little bit mask off now as well with the rest of the world, like with the US as well. It's as they're getting backed into a corner of it's clear. It's so clear what's happening. Anybody with eyes now knows what's happening. The misinformation campaigns from the wider media have disappeared. Now people just aren't covering stories, or they're covering them in a misleading way. But it's not like, you remember the whole 40 beheaded babies? That's not happening anymore, because at first there was this sense of we can lie our way into this seeming like it's okay. They're now aware that they can't do that, but they're carrying on. And I think that mask off feeling is getting really scary. Because if they no longer care about what people think about them, I'm not going to say it's like Homelander, but in The Boys, in Homelander, he gets caught, he gets outed, and he's like, now I've got nothing to lose.
Yeah.
Well, actually, this is classic behavior from fascists, right? It's to double down. So if you're caught out, in fact, and unfortunately, it's a very effective thing to do. When you're caught out, instead of apologizing and receding, there's another option. And actually, using Homelander is a really good analogy, because if anyone's seen The Boys, obviously in seasons 1 to 2, Homelander still pretends to be the good guy whilst doing horrible things in the background, right? But now he's fully open and he's murdering innocent people on the streets, but he's managed to rile up people and then they support him. Much the same as Donald Trump and Republicans. And what they do is essentially double down. So they're caught out on their really bad things, but instead of going, oh, I'm sorry, we didn't mean that, they go, actually, no, we do mean that, and here's why. And what that does is very polarizing, but it riles up these strong supporters. So Trump will now be more open about his bigotry, and he won't try to apologize for it anymore. He'll just double down, and that riles up his supporters. Same when it comes to Israel now. No matter how insane Benjamin Netanyahu sounds, there will always be those very strong Zionist supporters. Now, here's the issue, though, right? you kind of say it's mask off, sure, but materially, it doesn't seem to make any difference. I mean, yes, Biden is very annoyed that Netanyahu has got a little bit too far, but also here's 20 billion in weapons to Israel. So that's what really, really angers me, is that these liberal politicians go, oh, wow, too far now. I mean, this is really, really bad, but you don't change policy. I mean, actually, as Brendan Clark said on your show last week or earlier in the week, they had red lines. They had red lines for Rafah. Well, if they take Rafah and assault Rafah, then we won't be giving weapons to them. They do that, and they continue to sell weapons to them. And there's always an extra step, which Netanyahu will ultimately take, and liberals or those in government might do slight briefings, saying, oh, I'm really uncomfortable by this, but materially it makes no difference, and you are still complicit in this genocide. I don't care if you feel bad about it, if you're not changing policy, if you're not doing sanctions or withdrawing weapons. I don't care if you feel happy or sad about it, you're doing the exact same thing.
Well, this actually, yeah, that is something similar to, I think I did a video on it a while back about when you actually compare the language of virtue signaling versus actual action. And I had 2 emails from my MP, my Labour MP. One was about a week after Russia invaded Ukraine. One was 6 months after the assault started on Gaza. And in the first email about Ukraine, it was within a week. Already, Keir Starmer had said it was undoubtedly a war crime that was being committed. My MP, she was the shadow minister for culture as well. So she said they need to be sanctioned. We need to withdraw all financial support. We need to get cronyism in parliament out. We shouldn't be taking financial support from any Russian oligarchs, anything like that. We also need to be boycotting them on a cultural level. So we shouldn't be allowing them to participate in things like Eurovision, in the football, anything like that. We need to make sure that Russia feels the full weight of what it's done. When it was Israel, it's only when you see what actual threats look like from the government, actual steps look like, and you compare it to what you've seen about Israel, that's when you realize just how empty it is. Because if you just read their first email about Israel, say, oh, it's very concerning, we're all very concerned, there's been a devastating loss of life, there should be a ceasefire, we've continued to call for a ceasefire. They kept saying that to try and gaslight us all into thinking that that's what they were always doing. But those words on their own, you think okay, yeah, no, they do seem concerned, they are upset, but there's no mention of sanctions. There's no mention of international crimes being crimes against humanity being committed, war crimes being committed. There's no mention of sanctions in any format. There's definitely no mention of taking money and parliamentarians taking money from Israel, probably because my MP was a friend of Israel, still is, as far as I'm aware. It's ridiculous how empty those words actually are. But that's why it feels a little bit
kind of like the reverse Jill Stein effect. Did you see the interview with Jill Stein from Mehdi Hassan? Mehdi Hassan was like, yeah, do you condemn Putin? Is he a war criminal? And she's like, well, and he's like, okay, what do you say about Netanyahu? Yes, he's a war criminal. And it was a horrendous interview. And that's kind of the liberal version, but in reverse, which is that really strong on Putin. And Keir Starmer, as you mentioned, and many politicians said, oh, he's definitely a war criminal.
100%
okay, but Netanyahu's done the exact same things. Call it out. But again, liberals have no backbone. They don't care.
I think one thing that's going to frustrate me about the future is that if you look into the history of South Africa apartheid, is that with the BDS movement, it was the US and the UK who were actually the last countries to basically jump on board and be like, oh yeah, this is really bad. And obviously no one in retrospect regrets their decisions to go against South Africa. And I'm already frustrated for the future, but hopeful, obviously, that we will get to that point where Israel is so isolated, it will be forced, just like South Africa was, to end its apartheid regime. But I'm also seeing a moment in, who knows, 2-3 years' time, let's be hopeful. Obviously, we'd love it if it was next week, where, Keir Starmer stood up there and he's like, oh, yes, this needs to end now. This needs to stop now. I don't know. I can imagine that coming at some point. I hope it comes, but at the same time, it's that frustration of being part of this journey for so long, seeing that everything that we've been saying is so obvious, right? that even the other day, when the peace agreement was getting made in the background leading up to his speech at the UN, they got an indication from Benjamin Netanyahu that he was actually going to agree to the peace deal. And that's why they announced it. And then he immediately backtracked on it because his cabinet was like, absolutely not, this is not ending. And America, for the first time, was like, we've lost control of him. They literally said, a senior official from, I can't remember, the defense, whichever department it was, someone who works directly under Antony Blinken, has said that they are now doing whatever they want. And it's like, that's progress, right? It's nice that they're finally saying the quiet bit out loud on their side, but we've been saying this for years. This is obviously goes way back longer than October
But again,
7.
policy doesn't change. That's the thing with Blinken and these other people. They'll say, oh, we don't like it, but we'll stop fucking funding them, stop sending weapons to them. And that's something they won't do. And it's so frustrating that you're right. When it comes to South Africa, we were one of the last people. In fact, Margaret Thatcher was calling Nelson Mandela a terrorist when Jeremy Corbyn was on the streets protesting it and getting arrested for it. So we're always the last people. And why can't we be the first?
Well,
we won't. We're cowards. We are utter fucking cowards.
We also benefit financially from these things because when Nelson Mandela visited the US later in his life, he was still on the terrorist watch list. But Reagan said for years, like, oh, it's terrible. Yeah, apartheid's terrible. Did nothing about it. It was, you have to take away the financial and political incentive for the country to still be supported. The difference, I think, there's a huge amount of financial benefit and political benefit for the UK and the US in apartheid as it was, but Israel is the one where Biden has called it the best investment the US has ever made. And he said if there wasn't an Israel, if Israel didn't exist, we'd have to create a new one. The billions that have been put in there, I think that's what scares me, is I don't know how much it takes for it to not be viable anymore. Thank you very much, James, for the gifted subs, gifted memberships.
Thank you.
Very much appreciate it, James. We love you.
I actually saw a clip today of Mehdi Hassan and Owen Jones talking. I recommend everybody go and watch it. Maybe I should have clipped it. I don't know if anybody saw that. But I think it was Owen Jones who specifically said that when Reagan actually got on the phone with the leader of Israel at the time when they first invaded Lebanon in 1982 and eventually occupied it, Reagan got on the phone and said that the actions of your government tend to amount to a Holocaust. Reagan used the word Holocaust. And I just thought I'd look it up. And he did. Obviously, would never accuse those guys of lying, but always got to double check the context. And we've got Reagan, who's obviously seen as this like ultra conservative god for some people even to this day, and even he had the balls to get on the phone and say what you're doing is
the Overton window shifted. It shifted so much to the right that Republican politicians, Reagan was obviously the birth of neoliberalism in the US. You even had George Bush sounding stronger in Israel than Kamala Harris.
It's gotten worse over time.
Yeah, David Cameron in 2010 called Gaza an open air prison. Yeah, that's like David Cameron has the strongest thing against Israel in 14 years.
Yeah. If you ask these same politicians the same question, they'll give you a different answer. If you ask David Cameron, he'll be a bit pussy about it. If Reagan was still alive today, he wouldn't call it for what it was, because as you've said, Sneaker, it's got so much worse. The entire debate has got worse. So liberal politicians are to the right of conservative politicians in that respect. Now, that just means, though, Republican politicians are even way further to the right. I don't even need to explain that. Trump and the GOP today, they are the most dangerous organization on earth.
Yeah, with Gaza, in 2008 in Operation Cast Lead, when they killed like 1,000 Palestinians in the space of 23 days, The Independent did a report on that and found that the war crimes that Hamas had been accused of human shield, The Independent worked with Amnesty International to publish a report that said that the only side that had been using human shields was the IDF, and that's The Independent. Yeah, and that actually, it feels like that tip. From there, that was when it became extremely heavily consolidated. It's like we're not getting criticized again.
There was a Guardian report about, I think it must have been about 6 or 7 weeks ago, which also proved that they were using Palestinian prisoners as human shields. The people that they captured, they were blindfolding them and attaching technology to them so they could have a camera on them, but also headphones. So they would send them into buildings in Gaza that they thought they were booby trapped, and they would use the Palestinian prisoners to go in, and they would guide them through headphones while watching them on camera. So that's all you need to know about who's using human shields.
It's horrible.
Every accusation is a confession.
There we go. I also wanted to touch on a really crazy story that came out earlier in the week, which ties into this idea of like rhetoric and just how extreme some people are. You know, I brought up the Nigel Farage comment earlier about, oh, we have a comment.
Oh, yeah. Just adding in from Anti-K's Tarot, politics has moved right.
In Canada. Yeah, it's absolutely true. Everything's moved so far to the right. We've become so desensitized to absolutely everything. Owen Jones was saying earlier as well on that same episode I was watching with Mehdi Hassan that it's believed that first day in Lebanon when they were heavily bombing different neighborhoods, it was one of the single biggest days of loss of life in modern history in a single day. And that just goes over people's heads because we're just so desensitized to everything.
Well,
that's
not
going
just
on.
that. There's people online making jokes about it.
Yeah.
Obviously when it came to the pager explosions, I mean it's rare that I get shocked, but seeing jokes about it, and like I don't care about terrorists, right? I don't care about bad people in the militant wing of Hezbollah, right? It's not like I care about these people. What I care about is the lack of humanity you're showing, because obviously it wasn't specific attacks. There were children that were killed, innocent people were killed. Even if the bad people were killed, they were being targeted in fucking supermarkets, right? Where there were children around. And the jokes that were being made was sickening. And it just shows that these people do not care about violence. They want their revenge, or they say revenge when they're the oppressor here. They like that they're fueled by hatred and anger and violence. And the rhetoric has just got so insane that you can openly support genocide and actually get a shitload of support for it. I know Twitter is an echo chamber for the far right now, but still, there's a lot of them out there.
Oh, well, you don't need to go as far as Twitter to find the right-wing rhetoric, because the story that I was about to bring up was from Israeli media just earlier this week, Haaretz. Fantastic news organization. I would recommend going reading their daily newspaper. So they reported that 3 human rights organizations from Israel have been tracking this TV station called Channel 14. So this is a mainstream news channel. They have a daily show called The Patriots. It's so mainstream that after the October 7th, Benjamin Netanyahu did his first interview in 8 months on that show. And they were tracking every single time that a guest or host has called for the genocide of the Palestinians. Over the space of a year, it was 50 times for genocide, and then 150 times for direct war crimes and crimes against humanity. So some of the quotes include, if the goal of this operation isn't destruction, occupation, expulsion, and settlement, then we've done nothing. An Israeli singer came on a few days after October 7th and said Gaza should be totally wiped out and there should be nothing left there. A radio host who's quite famous in Israel said that we need to bombard them indiscriminately. We're doing it discriminately, and that's not a good thing. And the Air Force should be working a lot more to bomb them indiscriminately. There was actually a few times as well after a few quotes where the audience clapped, and this is one of them. So on the Patriot show, this guy called Yinon Mogal said, we just need to shoot the civilians in Gaza. And then the host said, we should just start shooting innocent civilians. And he said, certainly, they're not civilians. And then the studio audience clapped.
Certainly.
Certainly. That was the word. Like, I could go on. There's so many more quotes here, but this is not a fringe show. These are Israeli journalists. These are well-known people throughout Israel, the entertainment industry. And if anybody obviously said that in the UK, people have said some horrible things and survived through it. But if somebody said that in the UK, they would not have a job the next day. But all of these people went to work the next day.
Well, I don't know, because we have had in our media, we've had people say, like, what's her name? Julia Hartley Brewer said, like, well, maybe the immigrants will have to die. They've said, you know, refugee, like asylum seekers coming over on small boats, maybe it'll take some of them having to die. And she also said the thing about the Palestinians being displaced. She also said, like, maybe it's okay that they're displaced. So we do have a couple of those. They're not as direct, but we have it that window shift from like people pretending not to say certain things to saying, so what if I did say it, is very, very scary for sure.
I mean, the difference though is that we have that corner of the right wing crazies, right? Even Katie Hopkins, who said get the gunships out for refugees. Obviously, that exists in our country, but I don't think people talk about enough about the culture within Israeli society in their views towards Palestinians, because we'll say, oh well, and this is the liberal frame, which is, oh, we just got to get rid of Netanyahu, we've got to get rid of the Likud party and get in some moderates. There is no moderates in Israel when it comes to the political parties. They're all right wing or far right. It just depends whatever strand you're on. There was a vox pop a few years ago from Abby Martin. I mean, she's really strong on Israel actually, and she was just interviewing Israelis on the streets, and you know, she was asking very basic questions of the humanity of Palestinians, and the answers from all of them were absolutely sickening. Not one to go. Now, no, I understand vox pops are a snapshot, right? But not one single person was like, yeah, I think what they're doing is bad. And that doesn't mean there aren't decent Israelis who are fighting this occupation. There are many incredible, brave Israelis in Israel who are protesting this, and they're actually getting beaten up by the Israeli state. But there has been, when you have every single, essentially, most politicians, when you have the entire media, even from birth, push Zionism onto people, then it's no surprise that within Israeli society, that's the dominant narrative, the lack of humanity towards Palestinians. And I think people need to talk about the culture that's pervasive over there. And it's not just in Israel, it's worldwide. I mean,
in the US,
is it the birthing trips?
Birthright trips.
You know, they'll and this is the thing. This is why I think another reason why I think Zionism is very anti-Semitic, because it's about instilling fear in the diaspora Jews, right? Not just people who live in Israel, because they're trying to say your entire livelihood is an existential threat. People want to get rid of you. Therefore, you have to support Israel or go to Israel. And there are many people who aren't bad people who are like, oh my God, I mean, people want to kill me because I'm Jewish. And through fear, they buy into the Israel project and they grow up to be Zionists. And it's very difficult to untangle that. So it's no point just being angry towards those that have this idea. You need to be angry at the system that perpetuates this fear among Jewish people that creates Zionists. You know, I don't know the figure. I don't know how many Israelis or Jewish people are Zionists. I don't know, maybe it's a majority of them. But obviously, the wrong thing to do then is when some people become reactionary and start blaming all Jews, because you don't want to go into anti-Semitism. You have to look at the system behind it and what's perpetuating this narrative, and that's fear. And the reason why fear has been created through Israel, because it is actually incredibly vulnerable. Given the state power they have, given the money they have, they continually have to justify themselves, and that shows a very unstable society. We asked the question, which politician or which political party is going to finally break Israel's onslaught in Palestine? I don't think it's going to be external pressures are going to help, but I think it's actually going to be internal contradictions within Israel that finally falls, because they are vulnerable. There is only so long you can keep up fascism and apartheid before it falls under its own weight. That's the hope anyway.
Yeah. The main issue is that as Israel's expanded in the past, when they occupied South Lebanon, when they occupied part of the Sinai Desert from Egypt, is that was their goal. They wanted that. The first prime minister of the Likud party, he was the one who actually gave up part of the Sinai Desert. But when you actually look into the history of it, it was outside political pressure and the circumstances that Israel was facing at the time, which was high inflation. So yeah, there are circumstances where they can give up. The only thing that scares me is that if this movement continues and they come under enough pressure, they give up for now, I'm just always scared it's going to come back in the future, and that's the main issue. And speaking of like the culture as well, like again, I don't want to put this on all Israelis, and this isn't necessarily mainstream, but you know, there's a specific minister you may have heard of called Itamar Ben-Gvir, who's an absolute piece of shit. He's famous for one reason, and that reason is that in 1992, I think it was, a Jewish ultranationalist went into a cave, which was a prayer area, and killed about 30 Muslims and injured about few dozen more. And Itamar Ben-Gvir keeps his picture on his wall and every year celebrates that massacre. This is the defense minister of Israel, right? And this is part of the problem, is that mainstream politicians hold these beliefs and hold them openly. So Israel's only just gone further to the right as we've gone along over the decades. So where's it going to go in the future?
You'd have to. I mean, this is the thing. The politicians wouldn't be so open about it if it wasn't so accepted. Sneaker has actually just put to us some figures. A new Pew Research Center survey finds that 39%.
This was in May. This is in May of this year.
In May of this year, 39% of Israelis say Israel's military response against Hamas in Gaza has been about right. While 34% say it has not gone far enough, and 19% think it has gone too far. Now, again, what worries me is when we see the sort of Candace Owens of the world, is it Jackson Hinkle of the world, where they pretends to care about Palestine and their rights in order to justify their anti-Semitism. Now, I think we need to acknowledge that there is obviously a culture within Israeli society that's very hostile to Palestine without being anti-Semitic, without hating all Israeli people, because why would we do fascism ourselves? But again,
I think it's important to also remember that colonialism is a white supremacist project.
Yes,
that's what we see all over the world. It is always white supremacy that leads to it. When we look at it in any other circumstance as well, it's a white supremacist action overall. And when we talk about colonialism,
yeah, because a lot of people within that percentile who supported these actions could just be white people who moved over to Israel. You have to understand the colonial aspect to it without becoming reactionary. Again, it's the system behind it which is the issue. And once again, I say to the Israeli project that is, with the birthing trips and stuff, is said to people, to Jewish people, that your life is in danger. You can't really blame many Jews who feel scared and just want to feel like they are accepted in society. So the real blame here is the structural reasons behind it, rather than getting into xenophobia and racism. So that's what we do mention these poll numbers to say, obviously there's an issue with the attitude towards Palestinians in Israeli society, but I mean, I don't want people then going, oh, well, Jews or Israelis are bad people. Don't do that, because that's not the case. You have to understand the structural reasons behind why people have this view.
Just to clarify, they're called birthright trips. It's the birthright trips that they have, not the birthing would be.
Birthing movement was now Obama.
That's being like having a baby.
True, yeah, true.
Zionism is a really complicated word, and I do feel like people sometimes throw it around incorrectly. If you look at the history of like the World Zionist Organization, I would never use the word good Zionists, but there were people who were just like, they want to go somewhere, and they had no intention of ever oppressing or ethnically cleansing anyone. They just wanted to go somewhere and buy land and just live there peacefully. But when you look at the history, it's essentially the right of Zionism which ultimately won, and which is why they became so militarized, and why the left managed to survive for a few decades at the beginning of Israel. But it's over now. The left are never going to get back in power under these current circumstances. And when you say to somebody like, are you a Zionist? I think like it's such a loaded term in many ways, because a person, their own self-belief could be, I'm a Zionist because I just want my state not to no longer exist. Whereas the word Zionist to some people is, I want Transjordan. I want all my land back. I'm going to do whatever I can. And I think that's why it's a complicated word. And it's way more, even when I mentioned earlier revisionist Zionism, it branches off into so many different places that I don't think anyone identifying as a Zionist ever actually really tells you exactly who they are, because it means so many different things to so many different people in many ways.
Yeah, I think we'll move into another topic in a second, because I think we're trying to get ourselves on time tonight. But yeah, I think one of the it was going to go really well, obviously. I think there's like a very fine balance between emphasizing how violent and how like it has been devastating in a lot of ways that are unique in the modern era in terms of what we've seen in Palestine recently, but it's also not without leaning into like exceptionalism and the idea that like it's only Zionism has this level of trauma that's been weaponized towards it. Only Zionism has this level of control over its population. Only Israel has that capacity. I think a couple of people have said in the chat that like the Western world overall does a lot of this. And I think there's a lot of different cases of being indoctrinated into believing that this sort of violence is acceptable, being indoctrinated into dehumanizing people, especially Black and brown people. There's a lot of other cases of this throughout the whole white supremacist side of things. It's probably, and it's a lot of why the US and the UK are normally the ones that are behind it, saying like, no, okay, we're going to be the last ones to withdraw our support. Because it's a tricky thing to try and unpack those two things and separate Zionism out from that wider white supremacist sort of structure that we're in.
Just to respond to Annie K's comment that's been put up on the screen. No, I'm not a settler apologist, but there are people who are born in Israel who oppose everything that the government has ever done, that they oppose all the oppression, all the ethnic cleansing, all the wars, everything, but they still identify as a Zionist only in the prospect of, I don't want my country to no longer exist. And that's why Zionism is on a spectrum. And I would never defend any Zionists who want expansion, who want an oppression, an apartheid state, any of those people. But there are different people in different categories. We can't put a person who says, I want my state to I don't want my state to no longer exist in the same category as someone like Smotrich or Ben-Gvir or Netanyahu in any way. Which is why I think the Zionist conversation always gets confused in many ways. And I do think the word is thrown around in ways it sometimes shouldn't be. But again, go ahead.
I want to respond to that comment because, okay, none of us are settler apologists. I mean, you say it's gross. I think that's a gross accusation. I mean, what I was trying to do is look at the structural analysis of why people believe the things they do, right? I mean, you said that was, you were conflating it with American colonialism, right? But it doesn't mean that people that aren't born evil, right? White people aren't born evil. Jewish people aren't born evil, right? People are born the same, but bad ideas, unfortunately, get into the zeitgeist of many people. And you need to understand where it comes from. So saying to diaspora Jews who feel like, given obviously the context of the fucking Holocaust, I mean, there was a literal time when big forces wanted to wipe the face of the earth of Jewish people, right? That's clearly very sensitive. So when you have Israel, which is obviously a Zionist project, I'm an anti-Zionist. I think Israel is a settler colonial state, is a fascist state, is using the memory of the Holocaust, is using the very real threats of racism and fascism in order to build up a colonial project, right? That's not being an apologist for it. That's just simply explaining why people feel the way they do. Now, these people are wrong. I think it's a disgusting worldview to have. If you think that Hamas, the attacks on Palestine, that are either just about right or not strong enough, that's a disgusting worldview to have. And I think you're a piece of shit for having it. But people don't wake up one day and go, oh, I hate Palestinians. They're indoctrinated. So what I was trying to do, because we have to be very careful how we frame this. When you bring up polling statistics to say majority of Israeli people have the wrong opinion, if you just leave it at that, then that is open to like right wingers saying, Israelis by blood are bad people. No, that's not the case. Why? I mean, if we were standing up for the liberation of Palestinian people, why would we then adopt the same rhetoric as our enemies, right? What I'm saying is there's been indoctrination happening at a world level, which has turned good people into bad people. So it's simply explaining how people got to these positions. That's not apologizing for Zionism or settler colonialism. I'm sorry. I think that's a disgraceful thing to say, and I'm not going to have that. I mean, this channel has been incredibly strong on Palestine. It's an anti-Zionist channel. I mean, me personally, I'm an anti-Zionist. It's covered all the crimes and the genocide of the Israeli state. So to level that accusation at us, I think is insane. But we'll probably move on.
I think, to be honest, from my side, I don't necessarily want to step into the opinions of, obviously, with Annie K, we talk about someone who's Indigenous speaking to their experience on it, and I don't think that I'm probably the one to speak on on that. So I think I think it's a very, very fine balance. It's very difficult to. You need to analyze something without excusing it. You need to be able to talk it through from kind of different perspectives. And there is a lot of unpacking that we always have to do when we talk about it from the perspective of, I think someone mentioned in the chat the idea of like Israel being seen as like a fascist state, but actually it's kind of, it's the three biggest states that prop it up are all liberal states in that sense. And the idea that we consider I don't think it's necessarily our perspectives on it, but when we talk about liberalism versus fascism, understanding that the Western liberal world that we live in regularly produces and encourages these other countries that we can then look to and go like, oh, that's fascism, that's fascist state. It is navigating the intertwining of that is always a little bit difficult as well. But I think it's good to have a lot of different perspectives in
I
here.
do just want to quickly add that I am also half Indian, so the British state has also colonized my ancestors. I don't want to shut that in there.
Does that mean you've also done colonizing though?
Half of you.
Half of me.
Sorry.
Charlotte, you are now cancelled.
Moved on. Right, listen, I do think we should talk further, and I think it's always good to see we do have a lot of different discussions in the chat. We wanted to talk about Kemi Badenoch on this and her maternity leave. I don't fully understand the maternity leave situation. Thinks it's too friendly, too kind.
Yeah, it's a weird one because I have the quote here. It's really funny because at the same time it sounded like she was trying to say that we have too much maternity leave, but then also said she didn't want to change it. So she says we need to have more personal responsibility. There was a time when there wasn't any maternity pay and people were having more babies. One of the problems we have right now is that there is too much government getting involved in everything. People aren't happy with what the government does at the moment. Asking the government to do more is not the answer. The exact amount of maternity pay, in my view, is neither here nor there. We need to make sure that people are creating an environment where people can work and people can have more freedom to make their individual decisions. It kind of sounds like to me that she would get rid of the right to maternity pay and just leave it up to individuals. It's getting back into that individualism argument that like people like Truss was massively into as well. But I didn't really see Kemi coming there, but I guess so.
I mean, I thought she was a no-nonsense, non-bullshitter. Why is she signaling that she thinks maternity pay has gone too far, but then she's like, well, it's neither here nor there. Just say that you want to reduce it or get rid of it. I mean, I thought you were a no-nonsense politician, but she clearly hasn't. Now, I mean, the crazy thing she said was there was a time when people had personal responsibility and birthing rates were higher. I mean, first of all, she's not really cited any specific statistic or time frame. So all we can do is really guess what she's talking about here. And my guess is she's probably talking about the bloody 50s and 60s when one household could live on one income. So of course, if let's talk about a traditional family, because let's be honest, that's what she's alluding to here, isn't she? A traditional family, all right, the man goes out to work and gets paid enough to look after the family, and his wife doesn't go to work, right? That's not the reality we live in now, though. People have to work, like couples, both of them have to work full time just to keep a roof over their heads. So taking away maternity leave and all these other social security and safety nets doesn't mean that it falls on personal responsibility. It pushes people into poverty. What she's speaking to here is she's making a moral argument. She's saying that the government shouldn't have to step in. And the reason why is because of the moral degeneracy of society, and that's why it's happened. She doesn't understand the material aspect here. And the reason why she doesn't understand the material aspect is because she also said that, well, I worked at McDonald's and then I became working class. Now, now what an insane thing to say. Now, of course, she was born in a middle class, had a middle class background. Her parents were doing all right. Now, had she moved out and her parents gave her no financial backing or anything to help her out, and she worked at McDonald's full time and she's paying rent, then she would be right. She would be working class. But I suspect that's not what she was talking about. She was probably saying, well, I had a Saturday job, right, at McDonald's, and as soon as I went through the doors, I'm suddenly working class. This is somebody who doesn't understand the material reality. And it's also very funny that conservatives say that they're the party of family. Well, there's nothing more anti-family than taking away the policies that help families grow. And another one is the 2-child benefit cap. I know that's under the Labour Party now, but it was the Conservatives who brought it in. That's an anti-family policy. People aren't going to have kids. That's why birthing rates are down, because people can't afford it.
Yeah.
It's very, very simple. But Kemi Badenoch either does know this and doesn't give a shit, or she doesn't understand, and she thinks we don't need to spend money on things such as maternity pay. We just need to morally go back to what we were in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, without understanding the economic circumstances, what led to that sort of family lifestyle to what we have today. Now, no one's suggesting that we should go back to the past where men work and women stay home. No, but I do also think it's a problem that the average family back in those days could support themselves on one income, and now it takes multiple. I do think that's a failure, but I don't think it's a moral failure. I think it's the economic system that we've inherited, which Kemi Badenoch, once again, does not understand.
What would also, we turn into one of those countries like America, right? So if you look at a lot of middle-class American jobs that pay quite well, they actually have somewhat better maternity pay than what the state would require them to do, because those middle-class companies want to be competitive, so they retain talent. But the issue is in America, because there's such a, I think it's literally like 2 weeks minimum, I think, by federal law. Anyone in the comments, feel free to correct me, that you get a lot of working-class people who basically have zero maternity pay. And that's what would happen down this. I can't imagine that if Kemi Badenoch, came PM and got rid of maternity pay, I imagine that actually most companies would still keep it, but eventually it would slowly strip away. And a lot of those organizations who hire people in working class positions wouldn't pay maternity leave. And we'd have this even bigger gap between people who have middle class jobs and people who are working on, 0-hour contracts, access to zero maternity pay, maybe a minimum of 2 weeks like America, because they're such an inspiration for workers' rights. This is what it turned into. I'm fed up of this like libertarian view on certain things, and this is what it is, right? It's down to the individual. You can take care of it. Don't have a baby if you can't afford it. Save up for your own maternity pay is basically what she's saying.
Yeah. And it's also the constant double standard. It's like the whole thing of being anti-abortion but then also anti-sexual health, sexual education, and then also once baby's born, anti-support for the baby. Like it's completely hypocritical. It's just virtue signaling. Like
Yeah.
mat leave in the UK is £184 a week after the first 6 weeks. If you're with a partner as well. And it's pretty hefty, especially when childcare is massive. Childcare has gone up, like it's more than like tripled in the last few years in terms of cost. Mortgage prices rent prices as a part of your income has become a massive, like the idea that we used to live in a situation where there were families where one parent didn't work. Nowadays, if one person doesn't work in a relationship, like that's considered kind of crazy, like having someone be a stay-at-home parent, because we don't have time for it. We also don't have the community that we used to have where families would live nearby to each other and they'd all support each other and like do the childcare as like a family thing. It just feels like a random thing to fire out into the world. Like, oh, I haven't said anything mean recently. I'm just going to chuck this out there.
It shows that she's not a good political operator as well, right? There are actually many easier arguments to make in favor of libertarianism, although I think it's a stupid ideology, right? But there's other things you could go after. But going after something so popular like mat leave, I mean, no one is saying we should get rid of mat leave. So to randomly bring that up just shows she's out of touch, and she doesn't have any political nous.
It just feels like throwing a culture war out there to be like,
throwing a culture war, which is, I mean, that is the modus operandi of the right, though, isn't it? They just throw culture wars out there. But like some things are untouchable right now. So to just throw that out there just shows that she has no clue, and she's a gift to the Labour Party. I mean, she's not gonna. I mean, the Tories aren't going to win the next election, I don't think, anyway. But having someone in charge like that, they're toast, absolutely toast. And to go back to what you were alluding to, Sneaker, it's out of the Republican handbook. It's we care about life when it comes to abortion, right? But once they're born, fuck them. All right, we'll send them to war, and when they come back, they'll be homeless. Prison.
If you're
no
homeless,
social security. Even before that, though, it's like, right, okay, well, we don't want abortions, but we're also not going to give sex ed to kids, so they're not going to practice safe sex. They're not going to understand about contraceptives. So what you're actually doing is you're increasing people giving birth when they're younger, right? Which obviously leads to more regretful. Well, it would lead to more abortions because they regret it, but also not giving the social security on top of that. It's a horrible political worldview. It's basically burning. What's that term when you call it? Burning at both ends.
Burning the candle at both ends.
Burn the candle at both ends. You're giving these people no chance in life. It's a horrible thing, and I think that's conservatism in a nutshell.
Yeah, and it was also Biden in America as well after the pandemic, and he came in. He passed whatever the name of the act was, I don't know, but they had child tax credit, right? So all organizations said that literally took almost most children in America who were in poverty out of technical poverty, and it was the Republicans who then, when it came for renewal, voted against it. And it's because Republicans in America, the conservatives, all have that kind of libertarian flair, right? The idea of like people should just be able to take care of their own families. And I've seen a little bit of a rise of like that kind of American libertarianism in the UK. Obviously, I think Liz Truss was probably the perfect example of that. That's why she's spending so much time in America. But I'm kind of scared of that type of conservatism for the future. I really hope we don't go down that American libertarian route, because I feel like that individualism kind of approach would be quite scary for the UK in the future.
That funding is coming here, though, isn't it? That's what, like, the Alliance Defending Freedom, the anti-abortion group that also want to sterilize trans people. They're in the US heavily, and they're expanding into Europe and the UK now as well. They always say it's libertarianism, but then when it comes to like state control of like prisons, they're like, oh no, prison, we need loads of prison. That's fine. It's just when it comes to healthcare that we don't want it to be our policy.
I was thinking about libertarian the other day, right? And it's very funny, right, that the two public services that they support is policing and the military. But why is that? Like, just think about it. So you want to strip it down to its core. Why is it policing and military are the only public services that libertarians support? Why don't they support healthcare? Why is that? Why is healthcare government overreach, but the military or the police isn't, despite the fact that the police are heavily militarized, and also they are very invasive to your personal rights. When it comes to the military, they're also, they're imperialist abroad. So it's these two things. And the reason why is because at the end of the day, you strip it back to its core, libertarianism is just they're just basic right wingers. A lot of them, again, I know that word gets thrown around, fascist, but you scratch one, you seem to find it. Now, why isn't healthcare the number one thing? And even if you were to try and follow the logic somehow, you could say, well, okay, well, in order to have a police force, you also need people to do the job. They need to be healthy. So surely access to healthcare is the priority here. I mean, they don't think that hard, do they, libertarians? But it's very funny that it's policing and military. They're the only things they support. Any other public service? It's government control.
Yeah.
I will. We have the worst police as well.
There's an interesting. There was do you remember during Black Lives Matter when Palestinians were giving advice to Black Lives Matter protesters, because a lot of the tear gas that was being used against BLM protesters was the same stuff that was used against Palestinians by the IDF, because the IDF trained the US police, don't they, as well. But there was actually, on the healthcare thing, I saw something the other day. They were talking about the idea that actually healthcare is weaponized in the US and in the UK in the same as a similar, only when it's like an element of control. And they were talking about the whole thing of people being sectioned, or pushed, or like given kind of declared like mentally unsound on their own, and how it can be weaponized in the US and in the UK. And it was one of those, it was really interesting. It was very, very nuanced. So I need to find it and like share it on TikTok or something. But it was essentially like there have been loads of different cases of, I think a police officer had assaulted his girlfriend. And in order to prevent her being able to make a statement against him, he got her like 5220, 220, 2120, the US version of sectioning someone, basically. 5150'd. He got her 5150'd, so she was mentally unsound. So she then wasn't able to bring charges against him. And there's a lot of cases of this in the US, especially when it comes to poor people, especially when it comes to POC, declaring people mentally unfit is something that will be looked at in your criminal record for the rest of your life. It'll be considered when you're being sentenced on different things. If you've got a history of mental illness and the way that it's used, that kind of stigma against it is a place where the government will step in on the kind of controlling element as well. So it's like, even in healthcare, the times that it's provided is typically as a form of like weaponizing people, and it's not really focusing on actually safeguarding anyone. But I thought it was an interesting thing that I heard about.
Yeah, that's insane. I mean, there's so there's such a pervasive issue when it comes to sexual assault within the police force here in America. Obviously, we've had many recent instances of rape, of sexual assault, abuse of women. That is being used by the powers throughout the Met because they can get away with it, and obviously it happens worldwide. It's not something I'm particularly qualified to talk about, but I'm shocked nonetheless.
Well, I will. Oh, you go ahead, Charlotte.
No, you go.
Oh, no, I was going to bring it back to Kemi for a second, but if you wanted to say
bring it back to
anything else.
Kemi. No, bring it back to Kemi, because I think we need to talk about our liberals argument as well before we get to the end.
No, I heard as well, I haven't looked into this, but I was listening to it on a podcast today about how when Kemi was doing door stopping, she's obviously, there's the controversy around her saying that we need to allow the right type of cultures as well into the UK. Did you hear about this? And she specifically cited how she was knocking on doors during the campaign and came across a woman who said that she couldn't speak to her and she had to get her husband, which I don't even know if I believe, because Kemi has actually been caught lying before. I don't know if you remember, about 2 years ago, she was in Parliament saying that while she's been making these laws around LGBTQ stuff, because she was her official title? The Minister for like Women Inequalities, was it? I think. She said that she was consulting LGBTQ companies, and I think it was one of the like Pink News or something like that did like a Freedom of Information Act and found out that her department haven't contacted a single LGBTQ organization. So, and she's been caught lying a couple of times in the past. So when she cites these random sources of, oh, a woman refused to speak to her because she had to get her husband, I just can't believe her. I just don't believe anything she says when she makes up these random stories.
And also saying that some cultures are better than others, again, is another fascist talking point. And unfortunately, that is something that's very popular to say in this country. Cheerleaded by the mainstream. Julia Hartley-Brewer, one of them. That's a very scary thing, because that can really latch on, because of course let's talk about Islamophobia in this country, and this idea that some cultures are better than others, which is crazy because it removes all historical facts, right? People, unfortunately, a lot of people will look at Islam and say it's a bad religion, it's bad people. We're forgetting about the amazing inventions that happened under Islam, whilst also forgetting the very violent history of white people and Britain. So it's like, right, what they're actually saying is some crimes are excusable if you belong to this particular culture or race. But if you're a Muslim or if you're Islam, we only look at the bad stuff and forget about the good stuff. That narrative is very, very strong, which is why I think it does worry me when Kemi Badenoch says some cultures are better than others. That is that will work, I think, as a dog whistle, which is not true. It is not true. Your humanity is not based on your culture. Your humanity is based on your humanity. If it was purely based on culture, then I think religion would be far more prevalent today. Not to say that it isn't, but let's talk about Britain for the context. We're not overwhelmingly religious anymore. I mean, a lot of us are atheists or agnostic. There are a lot of religious people who maybe call them contradictory or whatnot, will drop the bad stuff from their religious textbooks and keep the good stuff, right? I mean, you can read through the Quran, the Bible, whatever, and you can see some contradictory statements, right? But regardless, as a country, in a multi-race, multi-faith country, majority of people are quite progressive when it comes to LGBTQ plus rights, for example, despite religion playing a role in people's lives. So if culture was really an issue, then I feel like that will play more of a part in it. Not to say it's not an issue at all, but I think what's more important is people's material well-being. That's the real core of it here, and I think it's another dog whistle from Kemi Badenoch.
Yeah, it's what is it? Religion is the opium of the masses, in it. It's that one. I don't know if in it is in the quote, but it is very common that when you talk about Karl Marx, big up. But if you talk about like I made a video the other day about misogyny in the UK and how bad it's got, because it's like it was something like 1 in 5 crimes now. Violent crimes are violence against women and girls. And the sheer amount of white English men who will respond to that saying, well, you're lucky you're in England because it'd be worse if you're in a Muslim country. And it's like, that's the most insane take to have on people like every time you talk about violence against women, the answer seems to be, how can we find a way to redivert that anger to a different minority group? And it's like the misogyny that, like, you literally just find it's probably trans women using bathrooms. They're probably the ones that are injuring you. Or it's probably Muslim men. It's probably immigrants who are doing it. It's probably all of the. It's not. It's misogyny. Misogyny is happening, and we know what the causes of misogyny are. We see them. We have like loads of groups that are dedicated fully to figuring out how to combat misogyny, and they're never talking about immigration or trans people. Like, it's so blatant that we know where it's coming from, and it just seems to be again and again like, well, you're lucky you're not getting assaulted more, because you could get assaulted even more. And it's like, oh, great, thanks all, like, good stuff. It's crazy.
Sorry, Charlotte, that I interrupted you.
Okay. I was on one.
No, I just wanted to go back to his point as well that Curtis made. It ties into what you're saying as well, Charlotte, about other countries and cultures. Is that is the correct word de-Christianified our own history? That every crime that we've ever done. What was that?
Secularized? Or no? Are you talking about like history washing or whatever?
Yeah, just like we've history washed it, right? When we look at a country which happens to be Muslim, which might be doing bad things to its people, a lot of people see it through like an Islamic lens. But when we look back at our own history, for some reason, people forget to tie the fact that a lot of what we've done was directly under the power of the church, right? The Catholic Church literally signed off on everything from slavery to wars. And then even when we switched over, you know, a little bit of history there, and switched over and made the Church of England, even then, our kings and queens were under the power of the Church of England. But for some reason, we don't see that through a Christian lens. Anytime any other country who's attached to, you know, Islam in any way, we always see that through an Islamic lens, and it absolutely pisses me off. I think people forget as well that about 1 million Muslims fought in World War II. They volunteered. They didn't get drafted like our men did. They volunteered from India, which would have now then been Bangladesh and Pakistan mostly, but then at the time it was India. They volunteered, 1 million of them, and without them, we probably would have lost.
I think that's a really good point you made there, because a lot of people will look at some nations or Muslim majority nations and say, but these people are polled and they have incredibly conservative opinions. And once again, it doesn't look at the historical reality, which is that, well, our country used to have very conservative opinions under the power of the church. And then we secularized, right? We are, I mean, people say this is a Christian nation, technically, but no, we're a secular nation, right? Just because other countries are behind in terms of trying to remove the link between church and state doesn't mean that it's an issue with the people or that particular religion. It's just because they're still often living under oppressed conditions. A lot of people answer polls as well, what they think the government wants them to say, rather than being free as well. So you have to understand there is a dictatorship issue here, and it's the fact that countries go through different political systems, not at the same time. Just because we became more of a secular society and a multi-faith society and removed the church and state, or separated the church and state, doesn't mean every other country does it exactly at the same time. But that doesn't mean that people who subscribe to a certain religion is more immoral than somebody else. It's just that the structures of that particular state hasn't managed to, or the people haven't risen up over their own oppressive regimes. That's simply it. Again, it's another historical material analysis, which is harder to explain. It's easy just to say they're bad people, stop them coming over here, which is why a lot of right-wingers and populists and demagogues, I mean, it's very simple messaging. They don't try to overcomplicate their argument. It's very, very simple, and I guess that's a challenge for us on the left, because sometimes things are a bit more complicated and you have to explain it, but it's not as clear as saying immigrants bad, or bad brown people bad.
It almost ties into that first conversation that we had as well about Israel and the Middle East, right? I don't want to go too much back into it, but what Kemi Badenoch did is, again, you know who she's talking about, and she's dehumanizing them. And this is how we've ended up in this situation, because there has been a multifaceted campaign against the dehumanization of brown people, obviously, but also Muslims in many ways. That this is why people feel more sorry for people who aren't Muslims when bad things are happening to them than what's happening in places like Gaza and Lebanon right now. Oh, by the way, FYI, there's lots of Christians in Lebanon. Maybe we should help them now that people know that. Ooh, it's frustration. This is why people say that we're hypocrites in the West, because we ran to Ukraine's aid so quickly, these lovely white people, but anytime anywhere else is anything happening, like in Gaza or the West Bank or now Lebanon, we have a different tone. And you know what? They're right. A lot of people do, because a lot of people just have dehumanized Muslims to the point where they don't care when 200, 300, 400 of them die in a single explosion in a single day.
We literally paid people to house Ukrainian refugees. I mean, think about that. The anti-migrant and anti-refugee rhetoric we have in this country among our politicians, among our media, and among the populists, right? You know, when those of us on the left say we should have refugees and we should house them, the response is, well, why don't you house them then? It's a very reactionary argument. Yet for white refugees, our state offered, if people don't know this who are not from the UK, our government literally offered money to people to house Ukrainian refugees. Could you imagine them doing that for any other country, particularly brown nations? You couldn't. Of course, there is the geopolitical narrative at play that, yes, Russia are our enemies and Ukraine are our allies. That's why we side with them. But you also have to look at it through the lens of racism too. I don't think you can separate that.
Nope. And I don't disagree. And it'd be weird if I did.
I mean, being on turn left and disagreeing, that would be quite strange, wouldn't it?
It felt like we were having a discussion. So then when you said, like, well, I don't think we can disconnect it from racism, I felt like I should be like, well, I think something different. But that felt, it would have been wrong. It would have been completely wrong. I'm wary. We've got about 7 minutes. And I feel like the discussion around the liberals and the left is probably very big. However, we could talk about it briefly in the sense of what we've seen from Starmer. I'd like to get people's thoughts in the chat as well, because I do feel like we have a lot of people across different elements of the left in our chat. We have some people who still probably believe in parliamentary democracy more than others. I think it's an interesting one. From everyone's happy for the liberal slander, right? We're all happy to have liberal slander a little bit, but it's kind
of a feature of this channel, isn't it?
Yeah, but I think it's that it's interesting to talk about it at the minute, because we're getting told still to wait and see what Keir Starmer has to offer, but everything that he's put out so far has been like, I just don't know what happened to the people who said that we were going to change things from the inside when he got elected. I don't know where they went. And in the US, they're getting promised the same thing now. The left in the US are getting promised the same thing by the Kamala, like, blue no matter who supporters. And it feels like a scam. I've tried to warn them, but I don't know how to reach America from my TikTok.
I'm not. This almost sounds like I'm defending them in a way, but I'm not. I'm almost like attacking them.
Please don't.
I'm not. I promise. I'm almost like attacking the system. It's that, you know, when I look back at Starmer back in the day.
Careful, you're speaking to a Marxist here, by the way. So.
I don't know the name of my thing.
When I listened to Starmer's first interview with The Guardian when he was running for leadership, they did like a 5-day back-to-back. It's like him, Rebecca Long-Bailey, Jess Phillips. And you know what? I liked Starmer at the time. Like, in that moment, I thought, I didn't mind him, okay? That's where I was at. I looked into him, human rights lawyer, kind of sounded good on paper, whatever. And obviously, he is where he is now. I do feel like people are changed by the system. I don't buy into this idea that this is who Starmer always was. I just think that people get into the system with ideals, and for some people, they reject them and they stay true to themselves. And for some people, it just eats them up. That they realize that getting into power is having to play the game. Then they get tempted by buying into things that they might not necessarily like. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this is who he always was in many ways. But I do think people get eaten up and spit out by the system that is Westminster, that is politics. And they get pushed into this idea as like, you have to do these certain things.
I think I agree with you in the sense that people go in and think they can play the game and they can't. I think the thing I would change is I don't think it's like you have no choice in it. I think that's the threat of being a liberal in the first place, is thinking that you can play the game and change it from the inside. Like how Boris thought he could do Brexit better than everyone else because he's somehow special. I think Keir Starmer went in thinking, I'm going to outsmart these guys to win the system. And I mean, granted, he's been elected, right? But I don't think it's like a case of, despite the best intentions, you get pulled along. I think if you go in and you think you can change it, you're going to lose. Does that make sense?
I think I would disagree with both of you and slightly agree here. I mean,
okay.
Yeah, just to throw a wrinkle into the works, right? First of all, I don't think anyone argues against the idea that most people go into politics for bad reasons, right? I think most people understand, even your Tories, right, go in thinking I'm going to do good. Yes, the system, the system absolutely does change you. Now, in terms of Keir Starmer, though, Keir Starmer is a political vacuum. So I don't think he went into politics thinking I'm really going to fight the system or do anything. I don't know. I don't even know the reason why he went into it.
Get girls,
maybe. We have a lot of examples of Keir Starmer's youth when he was pretty based. Standing up for Palestine was one of them, actually. He has obviously changed over time. Now, I want to address one thing, which is that on a show with Cog, the guest was Harry, the champagne socialist. Someone said, "Oh, these two guys voted for Starmer." And they said, "Yeah, we voted for Starmer." And a lot of people, and you kind of alluded to as well, Lewis, like, "Oh, I kind of liked him back in the day." This is not I told you so or anything, but I knew Starmer was a fraud from the beginning.
It isn't I told you so, then.
It's not I told you so, but I told you so. I knew Keir Starmer was full of shit from the beginning. I never believed a single word he said. And the reason why, there's two major reasons why. The first one is there was many dodgy things that he did as a local in his local CLP before. I mean, first of all, he was only an MP for like 5 years. Before he even got anywhere near the leadership, there was he was quite factional anyway, and he was supporting the right wing of the Labour Party faction over the left. The second thing is what Jeremy Corbyn did as Labour Party leader to try and change the party is very, very unpopular inside that party. We all know that because it wasn't just the Conservatives or the media attacking Jeremy Corbyn, it was people inside his own party. So much so that I think it was over 180 Labour MPs called a no confidence vote to try and oust him. So Jeremy's position, his policies, and what he tried to do to the party, which is democratize it, was not popular. So when you recognize that essentially means that anyone else leading the Labour Party but Jeremy Corbyn was always going to move towards the right, unfortunately, because Jeremy had most of the people against him. He also had the entire machine against him. So when you bring in someone like Keir Starmer, who has always been very closely aligned to the establishment, the guy was former director of public prosecutions, a human rights lawyer, even though his record is pretty abysmal for human rights, someone who was that embellished within the establishment wasn't going to continue the Corbyn project or even a Corbyn light project, which is, all right, maybe I'll continue imperialism globally, but I'll keep some of these left-wing domestic policies. No, he was always going to allow the right wing to come in and retake over the party. The forces that led to Jeremy Corbyn essentially being... I know he democratically lost an election, but the forces behind Jeremy Corbyn's downfall was essentially a secret coup. Not really secret, but it's a coup. They made sure that no one like Jeremy can ever lead the party again. They would not allow that to happen. So Keir Starmer becoming Labour leader wasn't by accident. We know that his leadership was essentially started in 2018, maybe earlier, through Morgan McSweeney and Labour together. There was a whole lot of money behind it. Turn Left has covered all these scandals when it comes to money through his leadership campaign, and also more recently. So there was never a single time when there was like a based Keir Starmer or even an acceptable Keir Starmer. The Keir Starmer we see today was the Keir Starmer of what he was always going to be. Now, that doesn't mean I think he was particularly ideologically to the right. I think he's politically stupid. I think he's a vacuum. he doesn't have any strong opinions. He is literally just the guy that Morgan McSweeney put in place. Morgan McSweeney and Labour together, they call the shots, not Keir Starmer. And in fact, Keir Starmer is incredibly unpopular. He could go before the next election. That's not an issue for these guys in the Labour Party, because they'll just put up Rachel Reeves or Wes Streeting. So I do think, I don't want to be offensive, but I do think it was slight political naivety to look at Keir Starmer and be like, I can get behind him. I can vote for him because I think he's going to sort of be Corbyn in a suit. And, we won the debate. I don't think that was ever on the cards. What we're seeing in the Labour Party was always going to happen under Keir Starmer.
Mm.
So no, but when I go back to, obviously,
do you not like Keir Starmer?
Sorry?
What was that?
Do you not like, so would you say that you're kind of neutral about Keir Starmer?
No, he's kind of a swell guy.
I just think you're kind of all up on Keir Starmer. Just tell us how you actually feel about Keir Starmer.
I think he's disgusting. I think he's a terrible human being, and I mean that.
But when I look back to, I was never a Keir Starmer stan. I just,
I'm not accused of that.
kind
By
of
the way.
like
I don't
him.
think it's physically possible to be that.
Yeah, true.
Anyway, my boyfriend didn't call him a bit of a daddy, but
He regrets that now.
But yeah, no, when I look back to, when he said he wanted to, this is before like he even got the leadership, right? His original promises, I can't remember all of them, but one of them was obviously like tuition fees, getting rid of those. At one point when he was leader, obviously he said he wanted to like completely get rid of the House of Lords, like that type of stuff I'm fully behind. And I do think, obviously, I don't think he necessarily just used that to either get or stay in power. I do think he believes in those things. And I do think the reason that he's backtracked
I have to disagree with that.
You think so? Go on.
Yeah, so we have evidence to say that he never believed in these things. We have people who have come out and said Keir Starmer quite literally lied in order to play the game, even before the leadership election. It wasn't actually Margaret Hodge, but someone told Margaret Hodge that Keir Starmer is completely lying about these policies. He just wants to get the membership on side in order to win. That's why the U-turns were so drastic. It wasn't a 5-year period of, are we going to renationalize water? Maybe not. It was within months of like, oh yeah, we can do that. So that's what I mean by Starmer. Starmer's only ideology is lying. Right? It's not that he's particularly wedded to one policy or the other. He's just a liar. But yeah, he never believed in abolishing the House of Lords. He never believed in these policies. He doesn't have any policies whatsoever. He is a political vacuum.
My thing with Keir Starmer, I think something that has changed for me over a long time and is still changing now, to be honest, because when you see a celebrity and it's a celebrity that you kind of like and they've done something that's really problematic and shitty, and you think like, oh, and you still find yourself thinking like, oh, well, maybe it wasn't that bad. I think for a long time I did that with a lot of male leaders of the Labour Party. So I think I did it with Ed Miliband. I think I probably did it with even fucking Gordon Brown at one point. But I feel like with Keir Starmer, first red flag was when there were 7 candidates in the leadership election. He was the only man, and he got elected. And they started calling Rebecca Long Bailey Rebecca Wrong Daily. And then when he got elected, he immediately published his first article as leader, like in the Sun.
Yeah.
And they'd always publish it in the Mirror. And then the thing that kind of made me super suspicious of him moving forwards was as soon as he appeared in PMQs and all the media were calling him forensic. You remember that? It was basically like he was technically forensically tears down. Like he was basically fact checking Rishi Sunak with zero additional information. And he clearly wasn't. It was very clear from the start that there was a manufactured image being put around him by the people that supported him, despite there being like a vacuum of charisma there. And I think I've got very used to Jeremy Corbyn being like targeted by the media. Even Ed Miliband had like a bunch of smears against him and anti-Semitic smears as well, with like the whole ham sandwich nonsense. Like, so then when Keir Starmer got elected, and all of a sudden, like the whole mainstream media landscape were like, "Oh, nice, he's doing very well. He's very forensic and interesting.
He can chair a meeting.
Yeah, he's so handsome and cool." Keir Starmer.
Did you see the James Bond cover? Do you remember that? It was like they made it look like Roger Moore.
Oh yeah,
when he said he was.
I remember. Yeah,
What
that was horrendous.
But
no, I'm sorry, but no one beats Jeremy Corbyn's GQ cover, or when he went on the last leg and he comes at the limousine with a big coat.
Oh, that's my favorite.
Or actually, a one-up it. He was given a gift, a jacket, and stitched in the jacket was "For the many, not the few." No one's beating Corbyn when it comes to attire. I'm sorry. I don't care how much gifts Starmer's received from Wahid Ali.
That's
You
why
ain't
he's
ever
getting
look
all
good
those
as our
clothes.
Corbyn.
He's getting all those clothes to try and match the drip. Listen,
Question,
I feel like
I have a quick question though. With this, display of who Keir Starmer is now, and everybody sees it. You said earlier, Curtis, that Tories aren't going to get back in. They can't get back in the next election.
I think they will.
Can Keir Starmer survive a full 5 years being this person? He got 33.6.7% of the vote. How the hell is he going to increase that being this person? Would the only option for the Labour Party to be ousting him, or do you think he can actually win another election being the person that he's showing to the world right now?
I think there's a chance he can win an election, but I think the most likely scenario is Starmer not being leader and Labour say. Like, the thing is, though, the next election I think will be very similar to this election, and the reason why Labour won, it will be the reason why I think they'll win the next time, is because the right are split. Right, the Conservatives, in order for the right to defeat Labour or Labour to lose the election, the Conservatives have to increase their support. I don't think it's going to happen. They're losing votes to reform. Every single vote to reform, even though it bolsters reform, is also a gift to Labour. So the only party that can challenge Labour to government currently in this landscape is the Conservatives. And I don't see them coming back in any way. They would have to claw back all those votes, or at least 70% of the votes from reform, back to the Conservatives in order to challenge Labour. So no, I don't think that the Conservatives are going to win or reform are going to win. It will be Labour. But I do agree that Starmer, even just 3 months in, he's becoming a hindrance. It's definitely plausible that he will go before the next election, but even still, I think because the right is so split, that even Keir Starmer stays on, he could still win an election, probably without a majority. It would be the largest party. It could be less votes. Could be a smaller vote share.
Lib Dem coalition.
Sorry,
Lab coalition.
Possibly. That's also a possibility. So I don't think we need to worry about, in terms of we don't need to worry electorally about the right. We need to worry about the narrative by the right, which is arguably more important, because yes, we've got a Labour government, but they're parroting Conservative policy. Despite the fact that Labour won a huge majority, they're acting like the Conservatives. So even if Labour win the next election, but the right-wing rhetoric is ramped up even more, you can expect Labour to adopt more right-wing rhetoric and right-wing policies. They'll be even tougher on immigration come 2029. So electorally, the right aren't in there, but in terms of policy and rhetoric, that's, who knows? I think we'll have to wait and see.
I think Labour might lose the next election, or they might form a crazy coalition to try and keep the Greens out, and they'll form it with like fucking Reform or something. I think Keir Starmer's going to get 4 years in, and then he's going to hand it off to someone with less support by the mainstream media, but potentially maybe like, I don't know, like a Yvette Cooper-esque person, like, how the Tories threw it off to like Rishi Sunak, and or like they throw it off to Suella Braverman or like Liz Truss. Like, they always find someone who's not a white man, and then they're like, you can deal with the shit. I think they'll do that, and then I think we'll have the same stuff as they're having in France at the minute, where it's like, well, we have to form a coalition to keep the far right out.
Right, doing coalition with the far right.
Yeah, I think there's a real risk of that happening, because people are very like, there's not actual popular support for Labour. But also, I really need to go to the loo, and I'm just going to tell you guys that. And I'm aware that we're at 9 o'clock. We're at 9:10 now.
Okay.
Do you want to? Is there anything that we want to finish up on or talk through, or anything that we want to kind of check in with the chat or say anything before we pull it to a close?
Should we shill?
Do you want to shill?
Who wants to shill?
Can I shilling? Can I throw it to you, Curtis, for a shill, for a final shill?
Yes. So
final grift, guys.
We haven't done it all show, actually, so I think we'll do it now. I want to thank everyone that came in. I want to thank everyone who agreed and disagreed. There can be some heated debates, but I also welcome those comments. We've actually got 163 concurrent viewers across Twitter and YouTube, so thank you everyone for that. 71 currently on YouTube. all what we're doing right now is completely voluntary. And it's always been a dream of mine ever since I started the channel, when it was just me and my shit broken laptop in my front room, was to create a media organization with multiple people. I'm happy to say that we have multiple people right now. There's 5 of us. It's so exciting. However, we all work full time, not doing Turn Left. And unfortunately, things cost money. So there's a few things you can do to support the channel. You can like this stream and you can share it. That's free. If anyone hasn't liked this, smash that like button. I sound like a real YouTuber now. Smash that like button. Share it with your friends and family. If no one's heard of Turn Left, right, you need to tell them about Turn Left. If you know any lefties, socialists, communists, social democrats, whatever, any right-wingers, tell them about Turn Left and to watch us. Another thing you can do is help us out financially. Now, we've set up a website for you to do that. If you go to turnleftmedia.co.uk/support, there you can support us monthly or any one-off donation. That will help us grow as an organization, get better equipment. It can help us with train tickets, for example, if you want to, we've got an exclusive interview in London, and ultimately build to a media organization where we're working full-time here. And that means we can bring more content more often and more ambitious content to you. So I want to thank everyone who's joined us tonight. We will be back Monday, or tomorrow that is, at 7:30 p.m. with our normal Island live. That's also Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 7:30 p.m. and back for our Sunday podcast, The Debrief, at 7:30 on Sunday. I want to thank, I'm acting like I was the host. I was the guest, actually. So you end it for us now before we close off.
And thank you for joining. Thank you so much, Curtis and Lewis, for joining again tonight. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Very much appreciate you joining us. All of those things that Curtis has just said, please do share, like, and we will hopefully see you again very soon. We'll see you Monday. Curtis is adding it.
Oh, I was just going to say quickly, you can also support us on as a YouTube membership for 99p. So if it's a little bit cheaper for you, but you can also support us that way. But yes, thank you.
Support independent media. Support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn Left.